grew up here in Salt Lake City, and I did elementary school, middle school, high school, undergrad, and master's program here as well. I'm currently a PhD program as well in sociology, and I really look at the ways in which undocumented students experience education, and in particular higher ed, but nonetheless contributes to that. That's my personal experience as well. I have DACA myself, so I grew up undocumented here. I have deferred action for child arrivals, which allows me to work, and that's what really drew me to do the same type of work with undocumented students, children of undocumented immigrants, asylum seekers, etc.
Thank you.
I'll go next. Some of you already know me. My name's Andrea Garavito Martinez, or Dr. Andrea Garavito Martinez. And I work as a community school facilitator for the district, for Canyon School District. I'm over at Hillcrest High School. I also teach for the University of Utah on the side. I'll be your instructor in a couple of weeks. I was born in California, but I grew up most of my childhood in Mexico. I'm what they call a transnational student, so born on both sides of different countries. So even though I was born here, a lot of my education and childhood was spent in Mexico. I've been in Utah for 12 years. They say that after 10 years, you're kind of from Utah. But I've been here for a while, and I graduated from the University of Utah, and so, yeah.
Well, we're very glad to have Andrea here, and because I also work for the Canyon School District. I am the Family Learning Center Specialist, and so I started the centers at Canyon School District. And I went to law school in my country of Uruguay, but I never graduated. I was there during a civil war, so I had to leave, and disputes within the country. And I came here, and I graduated here in international business, but I did my alternative route to licensing with Mindy. That's when I met Mindy. And I didn't work. I had a passion for education, and I was determined that my kids were going to go to college. So I got involved in the schools system in America, and I thought, wow, I need to tell this to my people. And so I started the family centers in Granite District, and I did it there for a while. Then the person that was in charge of the department at Canyons District, Karen Sterling, had the same vision than me, and she said to me, Mirna, you have to come to Canyons, and we need to do that here. So that's what I did.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Torres. I guess first I actually wanted to thank you all for letting me sit next to you. I know that a lot of the work that has been done is ultimately what I think has allowed me to be able to speak and act in certain spaces, and so I have a bit of a different story in that I was born here in Utah, born and raised in Logan, if any of you are familiar with up north. And so I was able to attend my undergraduate at Utah State, and then had an opportunity to do my master's here at U with Education, Culture, and Society. And since then, have just been learning and relearning, obviously various theories, and then also, of course, a lot of different practices that I've been fortunate enough to be able to participate in. I currently work as an advisor to the student government at the U. And so it's been a very interesting journey and process for me to be in that type of space, being able to connect a lot of what I've learned and been able to be passionate about into the student spaces that we have there. And so hoping to just complement a lot of the work that I think has been done for me, be able to kind of help continue that conversation with you all here.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask all of you a question. What would you like educators to know about, and what would you like us to take back to our classroom about our students who come to us, our Latino students who have various experiences with their parents' mixed statuses, or whether they were born here? So just a variety of experiences that they bring to the classroom. What can we as educators do to support our students?
That's a really good question, and it's also really heavy, right? I think for me, when I write, pieces in which I explore, my upbringing, being undocumented, being, an ELL student in Utah, I often go back to, this one experience in the ELL classroom, actually in middle school, where our teacher was just, super loud and, yelling at us essentially, right? And it's just wait, hold up, I don't speak the language, but I can hear you. You don't have to yell at me, right? And it's a vivid memory of being in that space and being whoa, what do you think of us? What's going through your head as you're trying to teach us? And I do understand that schools are very complex, that schools expect a lot of teachers, right? But also on the other end of that, it's how can we maybe make schools spaces where we can bring the students and engage them in projects. I love research, and one of my best experiences working with young people has been working with them on research, right? So essentially engaging them in community research practices and helping them identify a question that they want to help answer, right? And that question always tied to how does this question relate to my community to improve it in different ways, right? So I would encourage everyone in this room, of course, to either check out programs like Mestizo Arts and Activism in the west side of Salt Lake City, or look into youth participatory action research or community-based research, and kind of get into the literature of that to understand what that could look like in terms of bringing that to schools and classrooms.
Would you write it on the board or when we're done?
For sure.
So resources, our goal here is to also collect resources so that we can go and engage with the community.
Absolutely.
And actually, one of the research done on that project is actually a reading that you'll do in my class. Where they did a research on how youth were actually responding to the discourse on immigration back in 2007, 2009. And so I think I want to answer your question because I work in a school now, right? I work at Hillcrest High School, and I know there's somebody here that works at Hillcrest in the back, and she could tell you we are the most diverse in terms of ELs in the district, right? And so in terms of just numbers, so most of you might only have one or two or just a sprinkle of ELs, and I think that that's really representative of our state. We are in changing demographics, which you've probably heard millions of times. But we hear them, but when we get the students in our classroom, we kind of pause for a second. There's a moment okay, what do I do now? It's real, it's in my classroom. And I think that this is my second year in Canyons. When I worked in Granite, it was kind of a different experience because a lot of teachers were working in heavy Latino schools in the West Side or in Salt Lake. And here you're in a position where your schools are encountering a different shift. You're having schools that looked very homogeneous, and now you're seeing a little bit of a shift in the type of students you're receiving. And some of them are students are coming from other states and not necessarily from other countries. And I think that when I think about my own experience, I grew up in Los Angeles. It was a very homogeneous Mexican-American community. I went to a college after high school that didn't look like me, and there was a shock. There was a culture shock. And so I like to remind teachers that as shocked as you might be and trying to find ways to be effective and responsive, students are also experiencing that shock, not just in your school, but in the community, right? It's very different to move from Texas or California and suddenly be in Sandy or in Midvale or in Draper, right? And we're not in we're a team, and what we're trying to do is also address that I don't call it shock, but there is a trauma that happens with a lot of our students in adjusting to a new culture, school culture, but also community culture. And a lot of what I do is understanding what exterior or external factors are shaping the educational lives of our students, but also have direct resources to help you right? What are direct resources in the community in Midvale, in Sandy, and Draper that can help the whole family, right? Because they're all adjusting. Do we answer questions now or to the end?
What do you
I saw
like?
two hands
Go ahead.
raised. One.
We just wanted to comment that it's not just Hillcrest, it's all their feeder schools,
Yes.
elementary up to include, because we're
Yeah.
75%.
And where are you at?
We're at Copperview.
Copperview, exactly,
Yes.
Copperview. And then,
So just commenting on that, so I'm at Union,
exactly.
and we have a student, like this family that's from Italy,
Yes.
and like, there's no one.
Yes.
There's
Isolation.
no one that's Italian, like, in the
Yes.
school, in any nearby school, and it's hard, and I'm sure it's really hard for them. They somehow got into communication with like an interpreter that's been here for 7 years from Italy.
Yeah.
But like, that's it.
And I do want to acknowledge that because like Hillcrest is a feeder high school, but I work in collaboration with a team. We're a team of 6 total of us. Mirna is part of our team, but we are at the 4 title schools: Copperview, Sandy, East Sandy, and Midvale Elementary, and then Midvale Middle. Union is not part of this community schools, but a lot of, unfortunately, but a lot of our Sandy kids go to Union and then they come to us. But I think that is representative. If we were to be here 10 years ago in Sandy or in Midvale, our demographics would be completely different. We look at the demographics over at Union or even in Eastmont, right? We look at some of these schools. And I think that's where I would always invite teachers is to take a step back and look at your demographics as a trend, right? Understand your community in demographic shifts and what has that meant for both sides, because you know we hear the rhetoric nationwide, oh they're coming here, or they're changing my community, or and that language and that narrative really does impact our students. So in post-2016, life as a teacher is very different when working with immigrant and refugee families. And so that is why I kind of noted that article that you'll read, because in that, the researchers interviewed high school students. I think you were in college when they did that project, and they asked college students and high school students about the discourse, what they're talking about in the state level. And students were talking about how traumatic and how impactful that shaped their lives. And so I think that's a very good start for teachers. Sometimes it allows us to do our own homework and say, where are our students from? You know, what countries? But also where in our community, right? Where are they? And here in Midvale, do you ever want to have questions? I know I've had conversations with Jennifer. We talk a lot about what does it mean to serve children in Midvale? You know, it's very different to be in Midvale.
And one thing that I really want all of the educators to know is that you have us as a resource. At Copperview, we have a family learning center there that you need to send your parents there, because it doesn't matter if they speak Italian, they identify with foreigners. Mm-hmm. You need to send those parents to our centers. We have great facilitators. I retired just when Andrea came in. She became a great asset at Hillcrest. I'm really impressed what she has done in 1 year that I was absent. And then we need to use these people, the resources that we have. It's the bridge between you and the parents and the student. And some of you don't take advantage of that. You probably see the family learning center as the Hispanics that go there, or the refugees that go, or and it's a great asset for you, because that's what I needed. And I went to college in Uruguay. I knew what it was to be an educator. I have educators in my own family, but I came here And I grew up in a small city, and I saw this huge school with a cafeteria. I'd never seen a cafeteria in my country, in any school. And I went to a private school. And so for them, it's like, oh, this is scary. I don't want to talk to anybody here. Oh, the secretary is not talking to me. We are the ones that get those parents involved with you. We have great things that are happening. We still have a lot to do. We still have a lot to, to work on. And I'm glad these young people are here, to keep on.
Could you describe your services for those of us that haven't tapped into the resource?
The Family Learning Center, we have a mission, and we have the parents repeat that, is to enjoy and to value and to understand the education their children are receiving in the Canyon School District. And what we try to do is we try to get them inside the school volunteering, seeing, that the teachers are not scary monsters there, and that we make them realize how important it is for, to understand what you do, that you're not letting the kids in early in the classroom because you're preparing for the day. It's not that you're mean and it's cold outside and you don't want them inside the classroom. Because I went through that with my own kids. I was thinking, why do they have to wait outside? Because I remember I went to a Catholic school and the nuns will let us in and we put our hands inside their little robes to get them warm, and I was thinking, the teachers in America are not that warm, And it's not that you're not that warm. You do amazing. I take my hat off. I did the alternative route to licensing. I taught kindergarten for 2 years, and I hang up my because I thought, I don't know how they do it. I don't know how you guys do it. All the testing, all the things, all the kids, 25 children in one class of kindergarten. I thought it was insane. Anyway, I really respect you a lot, and we try to transmit that to our parents. And they always are writing thank you cards for the teachers, and they make meals for you at Midvale. Anybody from Midvale Elementary? Those parents love to make meals for the teachers, and and for Appreciation Day, we also tell them about the importance of attendance. The school has a goal. They don't know how to read the goals of the school. They post them on, on the internet, but they don't know. We read them and we tell them, hey, you know that they have a goal here that no more than 8 absence? And if your child is not cooperating, they're gonna look at him or her. We kind of scare them into going to school, so that you don't have that, because as a teacher, I realized how hard it was when one child didn't go for 2 or 3 days. They get behind.
So I'm gonna admit it, I didn't know we had a family learning center.
That's why we're here. That's why we're here.
Sorry, I didn't know. But so right now I have a little guy that is the cutest thing ever. He is a 1. They moved to the country August 14th, and he started school. First day of school, I met his family briefly. Then second day of school, he was supposed to come, and he didn't come, and I just assumed parents decided not to have him come. He was actually just hiding by the dumpsters.
Outside.
And it took a call from the school saying he was absent for us to know that he was at school. So,
See,
but
we
now
can help with all of those
yeah,
things.
right. So, do you guys have
Yes.
different interpreters? Because parents.
We have interpreters.
So,
we
like
have
Portuguese
people
and-
with the refugees. We have
Yeah,
Victor.
so I'll mention that. So
Okay,
your
please.
story is actually something that happened at my high school last year.
Okay.
We had, I'll share the story and then I want
Yes,
to
sir.
introduce
Yeah.
myself.
Absolutely.
That he was walking and wandering the hallways, and Victor, who's our liaison, came home and came to our school and said, hey, so-and-so is not eating. Dad is very worried because he gets home, he's just eating a lot. And then I said, well, what's happening? And then we noticed that the student, the first week of school, didn't eat because they didn't know that in order to go down to the lunchroom, they needed to eat. And this student only spoke Swahili. Nobody knew that they were just wandering the hallways. And then also when I went to go look for the student, they were making a noise when they were walking the hallway. And I said, why is your shoes clicking? And somebody had given him shoes, but it was cycling shoes. That had the clicker in the bottom, the clipper.
Yeah.
And so I automatically worked on getting them shoes that same moment because they had PE. So they weren't dressing for PE, so they weren't getting credit. So not only were they absent, not eating, but also being marked as not dressed. And those are barriers in schools, right? Those are barriers. And so this year we have actually hired a refugee student advocate. Her name is Celia Selensky in our school. And her job is to onboard students. Meaning the first day that they get, and Jennifer, if you ever have questions, she's here, has seen this happen. As soon as we get them registered in our school, she gets the handoff. And her job is to then teach them their number for lunch number. Remember, we're in high school, it's very different to elementary. And she teaches the locker, makes sure they understand what it means to get dressed because of that. And now the district has hired another person. She was shadowing today, and she'll be working in different schools, and her job is to do that. Once they start,
and remember that we work as a team, like Andrea mentioned.
Yeah, we're
so it's not like you are limited to one school. You know, we could go help in another school, in Union High or whatever. If they need our help, we'll be willing. We just moved to a new district. I will write my phone number because I didn't bring my business card because I retired, like I told you. So I have my own phone, so I haven't gotten a phone that you could call, but you could call me to my personal phone. I will write it in there.
We'll put it up there.
Need any help.
Yeah.
We'll put it up there at the end. We can do that. That's
and
great.
We'll move with you.
Go ahead.
We haven't had you introduce yourself.
He already introduced himself, but he hasn't been able to talk.
I know.
It's okay. What I would offer, and very respectfully, is what I would term like a parent and community advocate. But I also just want to recognize what I would term as kind of this vicious cycle where it would be very easy for me to hold the many of you accountable for a lot of the failures that I perceive the school system to have. But then at the same time, I understand that there's moments or instances where folks are holding children accountable for the failures that they're going through, right? And so then there's this really awkward thing of like, y'all are really under-resourced, like underfunded, all those things that we can go off on a whole other topic as well. And so that's just not fair. So then kind of coming back to that idea of parent or community advocate, I think we were touching on it a little bit, is that whenever I'm hearing people talk about children, I usually don't hear that perspective coming from actual teachers or even school administrators. It's usually coming from someone who I don't even think sees a child regularly, you know, in their day or even their week. And so then to me that can come off very backwards, where it's like, if I wanted to know what a community was like, for me, I would naturally want to ask a teacher, like, hey, what would you say this is? Because I think you all have a very accurate sense of kind of the climate that's about in your communities, right? And so in that, I maybe have this overly ambitious vision of seeing how teachers could, you know, better advocate even just within like city councils to say, you know, hey, our children, our parents, our communities are experiencing X, Y, and Z. What can we do about it, right? Because obviously as parents and I feel weird sometimes discussing these types of things because I don't have children. I don't work in a school necessarily, right? I do work at the university, but it's a different setting, obviously. To say, like, you know, as parents, like, recognizing my experience, like my father would leave home at 4, he would get home at 5, and he would just pass out on the couch, and then at one point he would wake up, help me get through homework, eat the dinner, and go to bed, and do it all over again every day. And my mother working swing shifts, I wouldn't see her until Sundays, and even then, you know, sometimes it would be a 7-day week, so I wouldn't see her. And so it can be very arduous for low-income families to try and be involved, and that's kind of the expectation, I think, that gets implicitly set on a lot of children, on a lot of families, and when that doesn't happen, again, it's easy to blame the family for failing on that, right? So I would argue for, or ask for kind of that ability to organize amongst yourselves of like, how can we maybe better advocate with parents, with our community as that whole.
Some
Build more
reasons.
bridges, more family learning centers.
Some reasons, yes, some reasons for that. And coming back to these ideas of theories and research that I was really mind-blown about a few years back is this idea of culturally relevant pedagogy, and then someone reframing it with me with culturally relevant civic engagement, where it's very easy to dismiss the opinions of youth because of all these legal barriers that we've imposed on them, or social constructs as well. But the fact is that they do vote. It's just in a very different way, or they'll communicate those things in very different ways. It's just not in a way that's accepted. And so then being able to kind of hear their voice. And an example of this, right, is I had an opportunity of working at Northwest Middle School in the Rose Park area. And I remember day one, I came in as a parapro, but because of my advanced degree, I was really, I felt really welcome from the staff, who just like gave me greater responsibilities than was maybe expected of a typical parapro. And I remember day one, I walked in, and with a sense of urgency, the principal approached me and said, "How do you feel about substituting for science?" Like, that was not what was on my envisioned agenda for that day, and I just nodded, "Yeah, sure, okay." And I walk in, I wasn't sure of what the context was. I later learned other things that led me to having to do that day, but I do remember it was a really rough go. I had never necessarily led a class. Yes, I went through high school science, college, whatever, and so I had my basic understanding. I grabbed the textbook, made as much sense as I could with it, but clearly the class was not engaged. And one of the prime sources for that was one specific student who was being more or less disruptive. And so when I approached him, his direct response to me was, "Fuck off." And here's this 7th grade student, right, who says this very strong comment to me. And luckily I do have the knowledge base that I do. And so in that instance, I just remember very quickly just kind of leaning on that and thinking, this is his space. At the end of the day, I'm the guest. Like, whether I'm older or authority or sub or all these other titles that I can implicitly have, he's the owner of this space. It's his school, it's his classroom, this is his community, and I'm entering it. So, I need to be able to navigate that the way that they want me to. And that can be really uncomfortable, I think, because of a lot of the social constructs that we as adults or authority figures, have been made to understand we have. But again, being able to kind of give that power to youth to, again, be able to communicate and voice their opinions, even though they may not be the correct ones. And again, like, I'm air quoting a lot of things because it's this idea of, again, it can be a really convoluted of just kind of having to, again, unlearn, learn, and relearn a lot of different aspects that you might go about in your day-to-days. But I would think that also is a strong aspect of that idea of being an advocate, to be more effective in taking someone's message who isn't necessarily always able to share, right, and being able to kind of share it, not necessarily like on their behalf, but with them, is something that I would strongly encourage. And a lot of that too, I think, is definitely rooted in diminishing, and I think it was mentioned earlier that yes, they're Italian, but they know they're understanding the experience of an immigrant, right? But diminishing that aspect of otherness, because again, in these systems, I feel like ultimately one of the underlying goals is to assimilate kids, to be this thing, and I would argue, right, that despite my success that I've been able to have in my experience, it's been really harmful, where there was just a lot of things taken away from me without any choice, any consent of mine, but under this guise of this is how you're supposed to be, right? And if you're not this, then you're very quickly going to get thrown out. And we can discuss all the consequences of that as well, or maybe we're fully aware of them, but leaning back on this research, leaning back on these theories, being able to kind of build up that knowledge base and confidence, again, to organize, to advocate, and ultimately empower. My experience, again, I kind of notion to it has been interesting at the U, where there's a lot of things going on in every little day, things that are happening between me and the students, and one of them for me that I've just kind of had to come to a conclusion to is
I feel like I might be the first person who looks like me who is talking to these student leaders in this way. And so there's this constant justifying and re-justifying of what I'm doing and what I'm saying, right? Despite all my background, my degree, my knowledge, my experiences, like I have to basically say, like, I know what I'm saying. When there's clearly another colleague of mine who I love to bits, but may not necessarily have the same amount of experience that I do, right? So that was a lot. I know some of it probably didn't make sense, but it's always in my head. So.
Are there any comments?
Sorry.
Yeah, well, I would like to know, I know about these family learning centers, and yeah, that's one concern, at least in our school. We already know, in these 4 years that we've been working, that parents are not necessarily, it's like, I don't care what's happening with my student. I want to help, but I don't know how. I don't have the tools. Can you share any successful experience that you have had with parents? Because
Yeah, we have lots of
we
them.
have low-income families, parents working all day, many
We
shifts.
have parents that
How
come
can we-
out of their shift just specifically to help in their kids' classroom. You never saw that before. No, I'm working. That was a taboo. And so now they're working, but they're coming. So that is a success. We have parents in the PTA. We never had, that's that.
How did you get to that point, Mirna?
We
So
go with them.
for teachers,
we
so how do
integrate
we
them.
get to that point?
Exactly.
How can we
Yeah.
get parents
I think,
working?
Andrea might have some answers too, because she has done great with her parents too.
So there's two, prior to coming to Canyons, I was a family center coordinator for Granite School District. So like, we kind of Mirna and I have parallel lives,
yeah.
but we've never met
Yeah,
until
so
this
funny.
year. And one of the things that I did in the Granite School District, I actually worked for a program and helped start and run their program. And it's very popular. You guys have it here at Canyons, the Latinos in Action program. But I bridged it with the Family Center on civic engagement with the parents. So the kids had to do community service, but they were in middle school, so the parents had to come with them because they were 13 and 14. So we did everything in a garden. So a lot of my civic and participation with the parents were actually around a garden. So we often think like it has to begin in a different classroom project, but actually we began it in a little piece of land within the school. And we had parents decide, we just did a meeting and said, we want you all to give us feedback on the type of plants that we want. So we just had the parents come, and we had all the parents show up, and then we also had a program called the Little Feathers Program, and we were a Native American Indian program, and we said we would like for you all to be involved in this garden and also to acknowledge the land and give a blessing to the land that is coming in our garden. And they said, well, we also want to provide feedback on the plants and the seeds that are going to be planted. So it kind of increased knowledge of what was happening in the school, but we also used that as an opportunity for parents to then become volunteers, to know the PTA, because said, oh, we need to fundraise now for our plants. And then over the summer, they would harvest, right? And then they would share the produce. And you see these community garden projects happening a lot, through urban gardening.
Yeah.
But when we think about, I like to share this as an idea of creativity, right? When I first started here in Salt Lake City, in West High School, we did an oral history project. And that was where we had students, our EL students, take a picture and tell a story. And then they did a dinner where they would present the story to their family. And we invited the parents to come, and it was a presentation. But it was having to think outside the box about how to engage your parents in your own school, right? Like a lot of you have that little greenhouses, or they have gardens. I know Sandy Elementary has a little garden. But a lot of what they're done in refugee communities is around gardens. And so here at Hillcrest, my job has turned a little bit more into teachers in their own classrooms. And I think we still, sorry, is my kid back there?
No, sorry.
It's also about thinking creatively around your technology. And so one of the things that we found is that parents are working, but parents can text. So texting services, a lot of school has them that are free, so like Remind. And so what we have found is teachers will send a text message, but we'll work with an interpreter to have it translated into Spanish to be pushed out, like their announcements. When working with our achievement coaches, and I keep pointing to Jennifer because she's in my building, is that I said, could you convey this message to your teachers? If they're using Canvas, all their assignments should be written instructions. And why do you think we're asking for written instructions? What's a big technology tool that we have?
Google.
Google Translate, right? So then Mirna and I partnered together down. We found that a lot of our refugees live in an apartment complex. And so guess what Mirna and I partnered in doing? Computer classes to parents. We brought Chromebooks with Wi-Fi's. And so we showed our parents how to access Canvas and Skyward. So if teachers have written instructions on their Canvas pages, what can we show our parents to do?
To translate instructions.
Copy and paste into
Google.
Translate. And that then increased the communication. It's something in a
Especially
way,
when the language is Swahili
or something that maybe it's not. People are like, well, it's not a direct translation. I'm like, no, but it's a tool where parents can log in, right? And so we did it for 4 sessions, 2 sessions?
Two.
2 sessions down in the apartments, and we provided the computers and the Wi-Fi, and then after we also provided students with a Chromebook to use at home with free Wi-Fi hotspot. We have 160 in our building.
In their clubhouse,
In their
because they don't have transportation. So sometimes we have to go to them.
Yeah.
But I just helped a lady from India yesterday. I remember vividly when she came to bring her kids to school. She had 2 twin girls, and she was not even at the school ground. She was across on the parking lot. And she was very timid with her husband there. And I went and I talked to them. I told them about the family center. She came in, and I'll make it quick, and because this is a success story. This parent got a certificate for the most volunteer hours in her school. Her kids were the best of the class. They were in the higher reading group. Now they are at Midvale Middle, and the mom decided to work because she got a work permit. She's from India. Guess who she called? Me. And she says, oh, Mirna. And she's always, thank you. She's so cute. And she is a very reliable person. I went and I talked to the principal at Midvale. She already, last week, somebody resigned from an interventionist job. She got it. She sent me a text today before I came here. Mirna, I'm starting to work tomorrow.
Great.
So,
Woo!
isn't that a success?
Let's move to successes and resources that you have through the University of Utah and the Dream Center.
Definitely, yeah. So again, a lot of my work has been with the youth, but maybe like that, more at the high school level, right before entering the university. But one thing that I do want to contribute to this former conversation is also that paradigm shift that we need to do. One of my mentors, Gerardo Lopez, I think he writes about how teachers in this particular school were, stating how they wanted parents to be like second teachers, right? But in reality, that the parents wanted the teachers to be second parents to their students, right? So I think that paradigm shift really helps, contextualize that culturally. We see the roles of teachers and having a lot of authority over our students and families, and to me that's helps me understand my approach to how I work with students as well. Because I was raised here, and even though I do bring that cultural lens, I think it's a good reminder for me to be like, oh, that's right, this is my role. When it comes to resources, at the University of Utah, we have a first Dream Center. We opened the second one, so we work with undocumented students, children of undocumented immigrants, as well as asylum seekers. And essentially, we try to make up or cover all the gaps that students were not able to access, in terms of information, resources, enrollment into schools, scholarship information, trainings for faculty, staff, and teachers, both at the K-12 level and higher ed. So we kind of try to do all of that. Yes, I'll leave it at that for now.
And they've come to Midvale, they've done presentations both at Hillcrest and at Jordan High School on the Dream Center. And this year, we noticed that it was important to, like Mirna was saying, transportation is a huge issue. So we moved the presentation. We had his team down at Midvale Elementary, which is more easily accessible for the community. The whole point of the other story was to realize that as a teacher, you can't do everything. It's about partnering, because those partners will partner with partners, which eventually trickled down to Mirna in that example. But it all began with the teachers doing written instructions, because as ELs, right, your levels 1s, you need to do a lot of modeling, right? And your instructions should be written because it allows interpreters and translators to easily access your curriculum. So if your kiddos are behind and you're having an interventionist, or you're having someone like myself, if you have your stuff written, even simple instructions, we are teaching parents on our end to use Google Translate, because they could take a picture and in seconds translate that. So that's a simple tool that as teachers, you could help us, because it's very, very, it's hard because a lot of your instruction may not be pre-written, but it's very, very, it helps us in a very simple way, because we're trying to partner. Alonso has also helped a lot of our counselors. All of our counselors attend the high school conference, and his team does presentations on current policies. If you're not part of their listserv, if you're working high school or middle school, they have a newsletter that we share amongst ourselves with updates that directly impact our students. So scholarships, resources in the community, and I'm speaking for you, but I'm saying the way that I'm partnering with him, because
this is a great partnership,
because we can't do everything
the
ourselves.
students can see the end result. You know, they're not only there in high school to get a high school diploma, but to be able to go to college, you know, and that's what we emphasize, how important it is to graduate from high school and go to college.
Is there a
I have
question?
a comment.
Okay.
So, Dr. Martinez has mentioned that I've worked with her a bit this year. Her group is so great. She has like a little staff there by her office, and she mentioned Celia that works with the refugee students. And had they not had that resource, some of the refugee students come in and they avoid school, they avoid their classes. And one of the worst things that we've seen is the reaction from teachers when they receive those students is kind of like, you know, like, I'm not gonna be able to communicate with them, I'm not gonna connect with them. And without her group, you know, like as coaches trying to coach our teachers, we would never know this. And so they're talking a lot about advocacy for parents, for community, but also to other teachers in the building who see them as a deficit. So you could be an example.
Yeah, and I tell Celia and my team that I tell them this, and you could tell them, that they're a little flag, and they walk around with students, and my hope in doing PD, I do presentations for teachers, that when a teacher sees Celia coming, they're like, oh, she's gonna ask me about my refugees in my classroom, or when they see my other team member, Juan Perez, that they're like the teachers, like the little thing that pops up in Skyward, when they see them in the hallways, oh shoot, there's Juan, or there's Celia, they're gonna ask me, they're gonna send me an email or something, because I think with teachers at a high school or middle school, elementary, you do kind of sometimes, it's implicit sometimes or unconscious where we feel like these thoughts, right? And I think having someone, we talk about this a lot as a team, is that teachers sometimes feel overwhelmed, and when feeling like the unknown can help you react in ways that might be detrimental to your student. And so how do we work that together as partners and building that relationship with teachers and not shutting down as a teacher and saying, you know what, and being honest, saying, you know what, I didn't do the accommodation at this past test, but you know what, can you help me bring him back or her back during my prep or during the end of the period so we could redo the test? And that honest conversation it goes a long way with the teacher and saying, you know what, I didn't do that accommodation, or I didn't plan for that test or for that module or for that curriculum, or Juan, I know you told me you can translate into Spanish, but I didn't give it to you last week. If I give it to you now, can next week, can you help me interpret during the test or the quiz or send a letter home or things like that? And I think that being honest, instead of just shutting down and saying, I just don't know what to do, is actually more helpful, because then we can help you work through that process, because our students can feel it when teachers shut down. Students can hear, we've had students cry because teachers have not said anything, but they've said this, or not looked at them, or purposely glanced over them, you know? And that is hurtful, because I experienced it as an EL, and or back then it was an ESL student. I called myself an ESL, and they can sometimes, even teachers, like, you could tense yourself like this, and when you pass, they can feel that tension, and they think that something's wrong with them. And so I think that's a good feedback, Jennifer, about making sure you communicate with the coach. We talk a lot. I know you don't have this all in your buildings, but be honest and say, you know what, we didn't do it this time, but let's work together, you know? So I don't know if you guys were gonna say something.
No, that is excellent.
What I'd like to do is have you each speak to how we support our students in the current political realm, specifically around DACA and Dreamers. How do I support my students sitting in my classroom? Because by ignoring it is othering, and it's a type of microaggression. But how do I build up my students with the political arena? But it does impact the exo and chrono system. It impacts them very much.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So becoming informed, right? I think that's the biggest thing. Knowing what's happening, like know what's happening in the country, know what policies are in place. Again, we talk a lot about students with DACA. The reality is students in elementary school, middle school, and current high school students are no longer eligible for the program, right? So what are some ways in which we can engage actively with our students in our classrooms to be proactive about them going to college, for example, right? So a perfect example is a student group at the University of Utah, some of the Dreamers. What they do is students, so you could do this in your classrooms as well, right? Like you could bring in supplies, of course, to have students do creative projects around immigration, right? It could be painting, drawing, whatever. What we do on our end is we digitize all of that work, we reproduce it as postcards and prints, and then we sell them, and then we gather that money and use it for scholarships, right? The same could be used for, immigration paperwork, it can be used for DACA renewals, it could be used for whatever you need, right? But that's an incredible way to engage the young people in your classrooms in doing projects, seeing their projects printed, then sold for fundraising purposes, and then again, using that money to benefit the community, right? I think also looking at the iceberg, right? Like on top we also see students don't show up, students don't care, they're not paying attention. The reality is that there is so much trauma happening right now, especially people losing parents to deportation. In fact, I know that the Salt Lake City School District has a loss group for children who have lost parents to deportation specifically, right? So that's not okay. Also knowing what resources are out there, like again, our website has plenty of resources. That's dream.utah.edu, and we'll write it down. But essentially knowing what's out there, right? I think a lot of the sociopolitical realities, the socio-historical context of immigration also affects the ways in which students experience K-12 today, higher ed also, and paying attention to the science, right? I think there's a lot of anxiety happening around immigration currently, and how can we step in to make sure that students are being referred to mental health support in their schools, or which also can not only trigger mental health consequences, but also physical responses to whatever so there's so much out there, and again we often post in our website a lot of great resources, including legal resources, which a lot of people need. We're working towards putting more physical health and mental health resources, and we have a lot of higher ed resources as well, of course. So feel free to again reach out or visit our website, and you'll see a lot of content. Social media, we have a lot of social media presence, so follow us. It's U of U Group Center.
And we collaborate a lot. in that sense too. A lot of my work that I do at the school, I run something called Care Team, SSTs, right? Care Team is where we're looking at the whole child as wraparound services. So every week I run a team with our psychologist, our social worker, our counselor, and our VPs, and we're looking at children. But I think when you're saying about being aware, is that we're understanding now this discourse, when we're talking about discourse, right? You know when I say discourse, you guys know what we're talking about, right? Right, when we have people attacking certain groups, right? Stereotypes, deficit thinking about particular groups coming from the presidency, right? And the rhetoric. We found that a lot of that is causing trauma, right? Anxiety. And so when there is a child being removed, when there is a parent or a family member removed from a home by an ICE agent, a child is traumatized. So then they become a victim of a violent or a traumatic event. So we partner with organizations like Holy Cross Ministries, Utah Partners for Health that provide counseling service for our community, specifically uninsured. So what we're doing now in my team internally is that when we discuss a student, we're not saying they're just facing poverty, but we're also understanding what other factors are happening. What maybe led that child to start acting out or shutting down the classroom? Well, we find out that their mother was deported, or that a family member, or right now I have some students that grew up in another country and they lost family members and are now reunited with their parents. But how do we know about teenagers when they're reunited with a parent that they never grew up with? It's gonna be tension, right? Adolescent tension, but also trauma. And so reaching out to partners to fill that gap, because some of our children don't have access to healthcare because of their status. So we partner also in understanding community resources and understanding, what agencies provide free services. And here in Midvale is Utah Partners for Health, Holy Cross Ministries, Latino Behavioral Health have a sliding scale for therapy, and we're always on the lookout for Spanish-speaking therapists and that are working with a community-based agency. So I think a lot of this is also, you're wondering like, well, Andrea, you know this, but what about everybody else? And I think we work as teams. We have someone at the district level to responsive services, and we're also doing that sharing of information. We do share outs with them and saying, hey, my social worker in my building, he could tell you, I send him the links because we have a lot of Black Latinos in my building, and I said, you need to know the experiences of Afro-Mexicans. These are links. My students are from, I call them mine. The students are from Oaxaca and Guerrero. You need to be informed of the social, political, and colorism in our community, and also know that immigration and political climate is causing social anxiety and social emotional. He was like, I take all the resources you need because, I didn't have to do that. But as colleagues, as professionals, we do that, right? We do that all the time. Like, hey, I found this really cute app that I found for students, whatever. We do that a lot too. But a lot of the resources, I wouldn't do it without reaching out, right? Like Isaiah has an awesome organization that he hasn't mentioned. But they have a lot of resources for Latino leadership. I kind of put you in the spot, sorry. But for me as a high school person, I'm always looking for ways to get my youth involved because I know they're already helping their parents out monetarily in high school, but there's other ways that they can become advocates for their parents in different ways through civic engagement. Right now they're getting ready to start working on the census very soon, so that is why I seek to partner in also getting my youth involved because they might be able to vote, which then helps their parents because they might be in a mixed status.
I just think it's important to mention that the traumatic event doesn't always have to be a parent removed from the home. Just the stress alone of parents talking about the possibility of it. Because I've had a student years back that had a mental break over just the parents weren't removed, but just the stress of the parents talking about it and worrying about it, that was traumatic enough for him to have, and the parents weren't actually removed from the home. But when we found out that was the underlying cause of his breakdown, was because of it.
Yeah, and having social workers in our building and psychologists and behavior and counselors to understand that as a form of trauma has been, as a trauma, we call it trauma-informed practices, right? That has really, really helped our children, because 10 years ago, I think when we were in school, that wasn't seen as we are now being impacted social-emotionally, right? It's just political, right? Now, the way you're talking about it is how we want teachers to understand it, right? There's an emotional trauma that happens.
We'll go here.
I was just gonna say there's something that a lot of people might not realize, and before this class and getting to know my student, I've learned a lot. From Venezuela, they made it through detainment because they had this little 6-year-old kid. Abuelita took 5 months to get out. They had to get a sponsor. They were able to get her out because she was one of the cheapest. I didn't realize all this money cost hierarchy. So fortunately, she only cost $8,000 to get out of detainment. Now, Abuelita they brought her with them so that they could work. They could then, Abuelita was going to be the caregiver. Well, she was in detainment, they needed money, they left their child with no child care, so parents started judging them because they were working overtime with not knowing anybody, nobody to watch their child, to raise money to get Abuelita out. Abuelita is out and is on an ankle bracelet. She cannot now pick up her grandson at the school because it's the same, if you go the same time every day to one location, you are red flagged for working. She can't go to the market. If she wants to go, she's got to go like every other Friday, adjust the times. I learned all this year, and there's so much going on with that that I was never aware of.
I'd like to end with culturally relevant pedagogy and possibly resources that you have, that you've created and been part of.
I appreciate Andrea's segue because so the program is called Utah Latinx Youth Symposium, and it's actually a spin-off from a very successful program in Idaho called the Hispanic Youth Symposium. And the basic idea of it, at least how I've been able to frame it, is a mentorship pathway with the underlying goal of empowerment. And so trying to rewind just a little bit of this big, massive conversation that I wish we had more than an hour to really go into. The idea of empowerment, right? Like I in a very simplistic way, right? Potentially, I very much view your jobs, right, as preparing me to get ready for whatever's out there, right? So helping me be able to navigate the choices that are best for me, not necessarily for whatever other expectations maybe other folks may have. And so, a quick challenge, that I would offer too, because the program is not necessarily like go to college, like I'm not forcing that narrative in there, but I am doing my best to connect high school students to other mentors, right? And I, humbly use myself as an example, as well as other students who are currently graduate students or other younger professionals who maybe fit more like our generation, right? I just turned 30. I don't feel it, I don't act like it, but that's where I'm at. And so, and I say that a lot because it's like, growing up, I never had someone who looked like me or spoke like me or sounded like me or felt like me to be able to kind of relate some of the things that maybe I was seeing that it definitely felt like others weren't. And so that's kind of the idea there with me trying to end on this idea of what are the resources, right? At the end of the day, what I very much try to do with the students at the U or any students I try to impact with the program that we get to run is this idea of you are your best resource. Ultimately, there are limits to things, and as grandiose and as hopeful as I think a lot of us may want to speak or even act, right, in this idea that every student's going to go off and be the successful college kid, that just may not be logistically feasible. And so putting that immense pressure on the student to have to be this successful mold of something that we've decided is an acceptable thing is something that I challenge myself on too. And so with the students, right, at the end of the day, I just want to let them know, hey, these are your choices. Hey, this is how maybe you can navigate it. hey, let me know how I can help you. And so being able to kind of empower them to say, there is a lot in this community that I can actually take a hold of and control of that I wasn't quite made aware of, I think for me is very powerful in them to see that. Where I love being able to pose one of the questions that we asked at the conference in the summer, because it's an annual thing. The first year was last year. We're moving towards our second year, and I actually owe Andrea a much delayed email because of a lot of little logistics that I'm not even quite sure what I need right now. I remember just posing them a question of just like, do you guys know who your city council people are? And the unfortunate but very expected response was just this blank stare, because that's not ever a concept that I think is really introduced. And just from that small example of many things, right, that are surrounding them that they actually can take full control of, I think very quickly starts opening up these conversations of what else can I do? And that to me is kind of that power of empowering, of using yourself as your resource, and then being better able to understand and also navigate what resources may also be available, which, yes, do include a lot of the things that I think have been discussed here.
And we're going to close out our space tonight, and I think that all of our panelists will be open for questions and putting resources up there just briefly. Let's give them a huge round of applause. Thank you so much.